welcome to another episode of The Buzzer Race. I'm your host, Nikhil Ranjan, and for today, we have Ian Hochberg, former Virginia Certamen coach, moderator, and current teacher at Yorktown High School in Virginia. Welcome, Ian.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Nikhil.
Of course, of course. So I think that how I want to kind of start this interview is talking about the game in general and how Certamen kind of brings so many people together, regardless of physical boundaries and whatever else may be there. And since it's brought us together today, I would love if you could kind of like share some experiences like here and there, whatever you'd like to, about meeting people through Certamen and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so I guess I can start with me as a student. So I started playing Certamen in high school at W.T. Woodson High School in Northern Virginia back in the early 90s. And I'm an identical twin, and my twin brother, Jeremy, and I were introduced to it when our high school teacher marched us down to a shrine, basically, to Maureen O'Donnell. So Marilyn Welch was my high school teacher, and she took us down to Maureen O'Donnell's painting and like hundreds of trophies, and told us about sort of the history and lore of Certamen. And it was definitely sort of mystifying and exciting. But then in going to Certamen, I started getting to know kids from around the state and felt very connected to them. And I ended up going to the Virginia Junior or VJCL, Virginia Junior Classic League conventions, and going to governor's school and met students that I knew through Certamen there. So it became like a extended friend group outside of my school, which I think is really incredible in high school to have friends from other schools. I mean, I played lots of sports, so I connected to kids with other students through sports, but it wasn't the same thing as Certamen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. I wasn't sure if you were gonna stop there because I did want to hear, also, other times as well.
Yeah. So as a teacher, Certamen has connected me. It's a reunion of sorts every month when we go to a Certamen at other schools in Northern Virginia. It's an opportunity to see all the teachers, connect with them as we're previewing questions, and then get to know students from other schools. So I feel very connected to students in Virginia that I've never taught in a classroom before, primarily because I got to know them through Certamen. And then some of them I was fortunate enough to coach on the Virginia state team. But even so, I've formed deep friendships with coaches and players from around the country as well, either from moderating for them or losing to them in rounds at nationals. It's a pretty amazing thing where you can be competing fiercely, or as a coach, I'm just watching my students compete fiercely, but you get to know the personalities of other players and eventually become friends with them. So
Yeah, I do think Certamen is like really awesome in that regard of getting to meet so many people. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely weird when I start thinking about it. I'm like, oh my God, these are people that I only met through this weird like Latin competition on the side I encountered in high school. So I want to kind of jump back to your time as a student for a bit, and kind of talk about, what your time was like competing in Certamen as a high schooler, and then how that kind of influenced your start as a teacher when you started doing JCL activities there as well.
Yeah, so I was never very good at Certamen. I mean, I was okay at it, but I enjoyed competing on a team. I was definitely into the language side of things, so the grammar, vocabulary, derivatives. But nobody pushed me, and I had lots of other things going on in high school. So Certamen was just something I did for fun. I'd say Woodson High School hosted a Certamen each year, and my brother and I were not given free reign, but extensive leadership positions to make that happen. From photocopying photocopying rounds. These are the days before it was all online. Setting up rooming and pitting assignments and dealing with the inevitable crises that happened, like getting runners to go from room to room in case, and to collect rounds. This was all before it was electronic. But I think I have a love of organizational systems and structures as a result of my days helping to run a Certamen at Woodson. And then I think what I saw was that I was somebody who felt connected to a community through Certamen. And even though I was never amazing at it, it was something I really wanted to provide my students with when I became a teacher. Marilyn Welch had done this incredible job. She's now Marilyn Batra, and I'm still in touch with her decades later, but she did an incredible job of creating a community and a culture. And my job as a teacher, or my goal as a teacher, which is really like a vocation and a calling for me, is to try to create that similar community, or a community where kids, where they can unlock their potential and discover interests, and they don't necessarily know what it will be, and I don't know either. But by just giving them opportunities to learn history, mythology, culture, literature, they evolve and then sort of blossom, and it's just amazing to see where some of my students have gone with it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I always like when it's about kind of giving back to the community and offering people that kind of same experience, because I do think Certamen is really cool in that regard. And so you develop in this community, you even provide this community for your students, or at least aim to, and that seems to be kind of like a revolving idea of what you do. You've also come to really get involved with Certamen at like even the national level with respect to Virginia, where you've coached all these levels. And you've definitely seen a fair amount of stuff I think that others haven't, since you've coached every single level and not just like one level for some amount of time. So I'm wondering if you can like talk if you have a preferred level of coaching, and then what your kind of approach is as a coach for, Certamen and all that.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I have a preferred level. I'll say that novice, I think, is really hard because you have students coming from different schools playing on the same team, and it's a very steep trajectory to learn a lot of content quickly. And I feel like there are other states that do a better job of it than Virginia. So I would rule that one out. I've enjoyed both coaching intermediate and advanced by statistics, like winning 2 championships at the intermediate level. I guess I'm considered a better intermediate coach, but I don't see it that way. I see it more as helping students discover their own potential. And I don't necessarily have all the answers. I don't have all the knowledge. I'm not kind of like a cookie who can just answer every question in every category and nail it. But I can help. I've been dubbed in Virginia like the resource, because I can help students figure out where. I mean, of course, we have like our standard books, but just helping them figure out what material to study, and helping students at the advanced level think about other creative ways of studying or ways of being strategic in their play. So I've enjoyed, most recently I was coaching the advanced level, and I really felt at home doing that. So.
And so when it comes to coaching, I just wanted to talk a little more about this. So you mentioned you're not really like I know every single answer type thing, but how do you kind of approach coaching? Like, what's like a day look like for Virginia Advanced, I guess, per se, like prepping for Nats?
Well, Virginia has a Costra, so often hosted at Flint Hill School, and it will take place for the 2 weeks prior to nationals. It's changed in recent years now that things have moved online. And some practices are held that way, but it was always held when I was doing it in person, and it would be very much in the morning, a couple hours of independent study with some just guidance. And so I would let the students direct where they wanted to study first, and then I would offer some words of wisdom or some thoughts about areas. I always think that if you identify an area that's a weakness in your category, and then you turn that into your strength, then you find the next area that was a weakness and turn it into a strength, and you keep just basically upping your game by owning an area that you didn't feel as comfortable before. So a lot of it's very much individualized. I don't have necessarily like a pattern of, well, we're going to go through the syllabus in this exact order. It's a lot of it is learning from the students where they need some help, and then helping them either find it, or sometimes I happen to have the knowledge in the area and can go there and give it to them. And then there's a lot of practice rounds, and I've heard about other states that do shorter rounds and do like 10 question rounds or drills and things. We normally just play standard rounds and compete that way. And then I will take notes on it, and we'll do like a quick recap of what we saw. But often it's not about the right or wrong answer. It's much more about how someone was playing at that moment. And so helping students identify how to get hot and get some runs, or how to cut off an opponent when they're doing that, how to reset and like say, hey, you were still stewing in the previous questions. And you think that like at the highest level that students don't do that, but they do. They can't let it go. And so the best players are the ones that really are focused on each and every question. They may have done a little planning and figured out exactly what the last 2 or 3 questions are left and around, like what categories, but they're really focused on each and every question. And they're playing not just themselves, but also their opponents. They're aware of like buzzer speed. They're aware of like aggressive tendencies. Are 2 other teams hyper buzzing each other? Like what's happening? And so I think part of that is I was a soccer coach for years, and on a soccer field, there's a lot of I mean, I'm very excited right now because World Cup's going on, but um, it's a complicated game with a lot of moving pieces, kind of like chess. Like players are always moving, and you have to be able to see the entire situation. And so I think in Certamen, there's a level of savvy that goes beyond just studying through a syllabi or reading, Carey and Scullard, like, cover to cover. I mean, you need depth, but you also really need to be a player, like a competitive player. So
Yeah. I like it. I like that you kind of focus on also like the gameplay idea, not just like, it's entirely knowledge based, right? I mean, it's still a competition at the end of the day with people playing, and how do you cut them off? And so, you know, you've run through these instances over coaching and stuff, and I really want to know if there's like a particular run that you had as a coach watching your like team play over these past couple of years that like kind of always sticks with you. Like this was like a cool or like crazy run, whether it's like a local, state, or national level.
oh, that's a good question. I would say that I tend to remember the negative ones where other teams have done it to us more than the positive. It's so much easier to remember when things go wrong than when they go well. We've definitely I remember a national championship round where it was basically question 14 and we had it won, and we just had like steam plowed through other teams. And in soccer, I always say like they're great equalizers. There's the weather, the field conditions, the referees, and you have to really amass enough of a lead that it can't go the other way, based on challenges or anything like that. And I do remember in an intermediate team years ago in the semifinals, our star player on the team and the captain of the team was just a little bit off, was missing some questions, and someone else stepped up on the team and started getting questions outside of her category. She was the mythologist, but she pulled like it was interesting because it's intermediate, but I swear there was like a lit question mixed in there, and then there was a language question and a history, and she was pulling in other categories. And sometimes it just takes a player rising at that moment to make it incredible. I don't know if you want specific names or anything, but
I that's up to you if you want to name people or not.
oh, I'll preserve it. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, no, that's always really cool to hear. I really, I mean, I only recently started coaching and stuff, but it's always fun to watch like the runs and kind of think back of what happened. And yeah, I don't know. That's cool though to hear, like this is a semifinals from a few years ago that you still remember and are like, this all took place. Like, I don't know, that's crazy to me to think
A
about.
few years, it was probably like 10 years ago now, actually. I mean, some of them, time warps. Maybe when you're my age or just in general, time starts to feel strange. Like some of the older rounds are more memorable than some of the recent ones. And then it takes a while for it to settle into like your long-term memory. But um, I will say that when working with players, a lot of it is getting students to generate their own questions and to approach a topic from many, many, many different angles, to think about like how a question could be asked, what different lead-ins there could be in the question. And part of that I learned through writing questions and moderating them, like seeing the game from another side. It's like, well, you could know something, but if it's asked in a slightly different way, you might not recognize it. So this as a player, it helping students to write their own questions and sort of approach a topic from so many different angles is really helpful.
Yeah. That's that was like the advice Mr. Lee used to give me, and then I was just like writing questions. What the? And just move on, and then like years later, I'm writing questions. I'm like, everything makes sense as to why this advice was being given. So I'm definitely on for that. So I want to kind of now transition really into more recent times of talking about these past few years. So we've transitioned into online being kind of a main facet of Certamen to some degree, though things are returning back in person once more. And you've worked at the Browning School. You're back at York, or I don't know, you're not back at Yorktown, but you are now at Yorktown High. Have you worked anywhere else school wise?
Yeah, prior to that, I was at St. Stephen St. Agnes School in Alexandria
Okay.
for many years. And then
Okay.
I took a hiatus. I went back to graduate school, and then the pandemic was crazy, and I found myself in New York City at Yorktown. Um, but I've been around Certamen sort of, I guess, at the national level since maybe 2006 or so, and from the teaching perspective since back in 2001, more at the state level. And what I've liked about the recent movement online is I felt when I was at the Browning School, I had a bunch of students who had never played Certamen before, and suddenly they had access to all of the collegiate Certamina online and to Michael Kearney's tournament as well. And it allowed them to just get out of bed and then play for a few hours in the morning, or play like on Tuesday nights in Michael Kearney's tournament. And it just lowered the stakes a little bit, and they didn't have to travel far. They didn't have to play, in person. And during the pandemic, it really wouldn't have been possible anyways. But I like that it was increasing access for players. I know that there's always concern like that students will cheat or be looking things up, but Certamen goes way too fast. You don't have time to do any of that. You have to be very quick on the buzz anyways. And I think I appreciate what online Certamen has done, even though it felt very weird. It was sort of a twilight zone the first one or two times I did. And even as a moderator, it's felt very strange to do it online, but I've appreciated it. I also really appreciate in recent years, Jenny Luongo's effort towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that Virginia has an equity team, and they, in collaboration with the NJCL moderators, sat down and tried to create and did successfully create a document as a writing guide for moderators to be more equitable and inclusive in the questions that are asked, and to make sure that it affirms students. And so one thing was like having people from a wide variety of professions, and both female and male, and people and perspectives of a wider ancient world than just Rome and Greece, or like an imperialistic, not being as imperialistic, and trying to think about the perspectives of other peoples, and even gender affirming questions. So recognizing that there's more than just a like male and female, that there's gender non-binary and transgender, and thinking about how to ask questions in an affirming way. And it's not easy, and we make mistakes. As someone who's been writing the National Latin exam since back in the early 2000s, we're focused on doing the same thing with that exam, is trying to make sure that the experience for those involved is one that provides windows and mirrors. And I think we've failed in the past on the mirrors perspective. Like it's been too narrow. But Certamen's getting better at it. NLE is getting better at it. The profession as a whole is getting better, and so I take solace in that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think like it feels I don't know, because COVID made time kind of hard to keep track of properly, but it feels like just in these past like 2 years or so. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of groundwork and work that's been put in prior to these past 2 years, but it just feels like all of a sudden things have accelerated and changed and seemingly been working a lot towards improvement and towards like a better place than where everything was just a few years ago. Maybe in not all accounts regarding certain things, but like in general, I think like it has been a very like solid, like positive trend that the scene's been seeing, which is great to see because we always want to make the game as inclusive as possible. Um, so I guess this kind of comes to this. So, you've been talking, you've been kind of thinking about, what we've been seeing in these past 2 years and what you'd like to see. And this is a really big question. I've actually not really asked this before, but I did want to ask it of you is like, what does Kirtaman mean to you? Like, your thoughts on the game, the meaning that you've gained from having experience as a player to coaching and moderating and organizing. Like, just what does the game like mean to you? And what do you kind of think of where we are?
I, I think of Kurtamen as a sport, but a sport of the mind. And although I've seen people actually end up bloody or get injured, and weird things happen in Kurtamen over the years, um, I know of schools where students could letter in Kurtamen the way that they could a sport as well. But I think it provides an outlet for um, children who are interested in really challenging themselves and flexing their mental muscles, not just their like the physical muscles that you would on a basketball court or soccer field or things like that. And but I think ultimately it's just about creating a positive environment where students are encouraged to explore the ancient world and see some of the rewards of that enrichment. That the studying that they do can have some fruits to their labor in actual rounds, and that it's a team sport. I know there are some amazing people who have played individually and have pulled all the categories, but I think in its best form, it's really people relying on each other and having separate categories that they feel really strong in, and then being able to play together to create a cohesive unit. And as a team, you're only as strong as your weakest link, but you're only as good as the leadership and the camaraderie that your team develops. And so I think there's a lot of like life skills that can be learned through Kurtamen. For me, it's just been a constant I've been teaching for 21 years. I've seen students come and go, but I feel very connected to the students who have played Kurtamen, and it's been a constant in my life. I mean, I remember coaching in a national championship with, I had a 1-year-old at the time, and my wife and I were both co-coaching. So, I should back up and say, so my wife, Kathy, was a Latin teacher and still is a homeschool educator and teaches Latin now and tutors in it. But she and I co-coached some teams early on, and we even met through Kurtamen. So Kurtamen was pretty important to me in that regard too. I was moderating rounds, and she was the coach of another school that kept showing up. And so I'd see her once a month. And just like you form deep friendships with people you see once a month, well, sometimes you find your wife that way too. So Kurtamen has meant a lot to me over the years.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's like, I don't know, that seems like the story. I was wondering when you would mention that you had met Kathy through Kirtamen, but we finally got it, so I'm glad to hear it. The final kind of thing, just kind of, reflecting on how the game like started where you were and how it would go from there is like, what do you think of the current scene? And are there things you would like to see change or improve or keep constant moving forward in this next year?
I I don't want to end on this note, but I'll say I've seen it become unhealthy at times.
Mhm.
I've seen it among some of my own players. I've seen it with players at other states and schools where it gets so competitive and so cutthroat that it's sort of, where's the joy in what we're doing? Like, what is the purpose and the joy? And I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. And so I don't know how we get back to that and we get away from the uber competitiveness that seems to exist. But I I think sometimes the detailed study guides that are created, and I know you've been a part of that too, and they're wonderful, they're amazing resources, but it's very intimidating, and I
Mhm.
think for some students it creates like a compulsion or a need to learn every single minute detail. Something that I've really appreciated in recent years was Michael Kearney's the Kirtamen tournament that's online, with tiered questions. I feel that students who just have an interest in the ancient world and have wide-ranging knowledge but haven't necessarily studied deeply can play and have fun, because the questions sometimes are as easy as like, what material, what, do all of these things have in common? And it's stone or something like that. Like, anyone can answer stone, but the questions approach from many different angles, and they're tiered. So like, but they're not traditional, like I found it in the study guide on page 73. And I've appreciated questions like that. I know I say this as a coach and not as a player. So as a player, I probably would have wanted to be able to find everything on the written page. But I think I want to reward kids who are curious, kids who are engaged in the ancient world and aren't just hitting a study guide. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how Certamen can get there. That takes some very clever question writing, and it probably will anger coaches and players. But to me, the game is not about every single detail as much as it is about a deep appreciation for the ancient world, and a broad appreciation for it, even within your category. So thinking about, in mythology, how do myths connect to other myths of other cultures or time frames? Or what about mythological reception as seen in the last 100 or 200 years in the United States or elsewhere? And questions aren't normally asked like that. They're very focused on the name or the specific action within a myth that took place. And you know that because I think mythology is your bailiwick. So I would love to see inventive writing that rewards students with a genuine curiosity, and help guide students towards that curiosity through resources that aren't bullet pointed facts, but are more explorations. Mm-hmm. So that's a wish list. I have no idea if that's feasible. And I'm a very practical person. So you just asked me to like, where would I like it to go? What do I think is ideal? That's what I think would be incredible and maybe not attainable. So I'll own that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it whether it's attainable or not is not really the point. It's more just like, where do you want to see the scene and what do you want to see come out of it, which is important at the end of the day, because perhaps that's what sparks something to start going from there, right? Is when the conversation happens. So my final thing with you will be, if you have any kind of piece of advice or takeaway. You've given a fair number already, but any piece of advice or takeaway that you have for players or just people in general involved in the Certamen scene in Latin that you would like for them to kind of keep in mind when they're, having fun with the subject?
Well, at the end of every Certamen I've ever taken teams to, the first thing I ask is, hey, did you guys have fun? And it's a genuine question. It's the one that's the most important for me and the fun can be just by connecting with other people, by learning some new facts, by being blown away and impressed by another team that knew a lot more facts than they did, whatever it would be. But it's like, did you have fun? And so I think that the process of reflection is kind of, and I'm going to sound like an old man right now, but the process of reflection is sort of lost on this generation of youth. And I think that reflection and gratitude are two things that I would love to see more of in Certamen. Gratitude for the coaches, the teammates, the older students who are mentoring the younger ones, and reflection on what you're actually doing at a Certamen or what you're doing to prepare for it, and what feels good, what doesn't, where do you want to go. I think that students have this drive to improve, but they don't necessarily stop and think sometimes about how they're studying, what they're studying, why they're studying it. So I would encourage them to be more reflective. I've seen students take to Certamen very late in the game, like starting in level 3, they start playing and they end up national champions or close to it by level 5. So it's never really too late, but an early start is always, it takes a rare child who can suddenly just turn it on in level 3. But what I've seen in common with the students who do start late like that and then really get into it is they go much further than the ones who started earlier. And the reason I think is because there's a genuine passion and drive that sort of surpasses those who haven't started at a late. And maybe there's a fear, oh, I don't have as much time, I've got to push harder. but I look back and I've been surprised by the students who have accomplished a lot in such little time, and that you never saw them play novice level. You maybe saw them play intermediate or not even, and they just show up on the advanced scene and are amazing. Which it takes a lot of time, but do it for the right reasons, and the right reasons are whatever reasons are right for you as a player. But among them, I would suggest friendships, desire and passion to learn in an area, the ability to push yourself but know your own boundaries and not go so far that it's unhealthy, like mentally, physically, or emotionally. Yeah, that's way too much wisdom. That's not probably not what you were looking for. You're probably looking for like a narrow, but
Nah. Don't apologize. Don't apologize.
as you can tell, I'm reflective and I'm always thinking about things. So yeah.
No, it's important. It's important. I'm glad you're willing to share it all, because I think it is a really important reminder to, Kirtamen's a competition, but have fun, right? And make sure you're enjoying the game as much as you may be putting your time into it. So with that, thanks so much for coming on. It was a blast hearing everything from you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I may be the oldest person you've interviewed thus far, but maybe not. I guess you have a couple more that are just going to be dropped soon. So, but I would definitely encourage that we hear from voices of all like young players that are recent, and then also, as old as Susan Shearer and some of the early coaches that really inspired me. There were some back in the 90s that I looked at them and I was like, I will never know 1/10 of what they know about the ancient world. And that's okay, but I'm just so excited to be in the same room with these people. So.
Yeah. No, we definitely will. We definitely will, because we want to include everyone we can. So yeah. With that, thanks so much for coming, and take care.
Okay, thanks.